Salam, peace be upon you. My name is Muhammad Laiq Sviki, the father of the Holophase. Episode 13: The Complete Journey. Undifferentiated phi to differentiated phi, the two movements of reality's genesis. Let me begin by asking you to imagine something with me. Close your eyes, not physically but mentally, and picture standing at the edge of what could be anything. Not an ocean, not a void, not a space. But before those words mean anything, you are standing before the possibility of standing. Before here differs from there. Before now differs from then. This is where episode 13 begins. Not with a universe, not with a beginning, but with the permission that makes beginnings possible. This is our story today. The complete journey of episode 13, told as one coherent narrative. A story in two movements so fundamental, so necessary, that understanding both is understanding what it means for reality to become real. The first movement, undifferentiated phi. Let's start with silence. Not the silence of empty space, not the silence between sounds, but the silence before distinction itself. This is undifferentiated phi. Picture a master weaver's empty loom at dawn. The room holds its breath. Threads of every conceivable color wait in baskets, untouched. The loom stands silent, its frame a geometry of pure possibility. The shuttle rests, waiting. The pattern book lies open to a blank page. This moment, between intention and action, between dreaming and doing, contains everything we are about to explore. We are not building a universe yet. We are examining the permission slip that must exist before a universe could be built. Undifferentiated phi is that permission slip. Now let me say this with absolute clarity. Phi is not a thing that exists. Phi is what makes exists meaningful. This is the first and most important truth of our journey. Before red can be different from blue. Before light can be different from dark. Before something can be different from nothing. There must be the possibility that things could differ at all. That possibility, that permission for distinction, is primitive comparability. And that is phi. In our rug factory in Afghanistan, before we wove the first carpet, there was already something present. Not the wool, not the pattern, not the design, but the knowledge that wool differs from cotton, that red differs from blue, that tight differs from loose. That knowledge wasn't the weaving. It was what made weaving possible. This is undifferentiated phi. It comes before existence. It comes before time. It comes before space. It comes before matter. It comes before energy. Because all of these, existence, time, space, matter, energy, already assume distinction, already assume comparability. Now here's where we must be incredibly disciplined. If we rush from possibility to actuality too quickly, we'll smuggle in assumptions. We'll sneak in concepts that should emerge later. We'll assume time when we should be deriving time. We'll assume space when we should be deriving space. We'll assume objects when we should be explaining what makes something an object. So we pause. We sit with the silence. We respect the ground before we build upon it. Undifferentiated phi establishes the ground rules of reality's readability. First ground rule. Phi is pre-ontological. It comes before the question, does it exist, becomes meaningful. Because the moment you ask, does it exist, you have already used phi. You have already distinguished existence from non-existence. You have already invoked a comparison. So undifferentiated phi does not argue about existence. It shows that existence talk is downstream of a deeper permission. Second ground rule. Absolute phi is meaningless. Only relational structure is public. If you could measure an absolute phi value, then shifting phi by a constant would change observable reality. But in holophase science, that is forbidden. Only differences speak. Absolutes are silent. Third ground rule. Phi is cyclic. Not as a decorative statement, but as a constraint on what kind of reality can ever emerge. Circle-valued structure makes closure unavoidable. It means loops will matter. It means return and winding will be more than metaphor. Fourth ground rule. Phi is patchwise. You should not assume phi is a single global number you can assign everywhere without trouble. Reality may require charts, patches, sections. Not because it is broken, because a cyclic target space does not promise global lifting. Those obstructions will later become defects, and defects will later become the birthplace of discreteness. Fifth ground rule. Phi has infinite descriptive depth, but we have finite access. We will never possess phi in full. We will only read finite sentences from an infinite language. That is not failure. That is the condition of being an observer. Undifferentiated phi, then, is the chapter that makes the foundation clean. It answers, what is the primitive? What is it not? What are we allowed to say before anything becomes measurable? And it ends with a handoff. A handoff to the moment when silence begins to speak. The turning point, from silence to speech. Now we come to the most delicate, most beautiful moment in our entire journey. The moment when undifferentiated phi becomes differentiated. This is not a mystical event. This is not magic. This is the first lawful transition in reality, when phi becomes readable as change. Let me say that again, because everything follows from this. When phi becomes readable as change. Not when things start moving, not when time begins, not when space expands, but when the possibility of distinction becomes something that can itself be distinguished. This is the birth of the first differential. A equals d phi. This simple equation, this turning of possibility into readable change, is the most important moment in reality. Because from this moment, three inseparable readouts emerge together. Not one after another, not separately, but woven together as one triune face. The temporal dimension, omega, the spatial dimension, kappa, the kinematic dimension, nu, woven from the first two. This is not time, space, and motion as we know them. This is their primitive form, their first appearance. Every higher derivative that follows, every finer question about how phi changes, will cast these three shadows together. What we will later call worlds, objects, forces, histories, and minds, all are stable licensed patterns inside this derivative language. The second movement, differentiated phi. From A equals d phi, our universe begins to speak, but it doesn't speak in complete sentences yet. First, it builds its vocabulary. This is where the second movement of episode 13 unfolds. The structured exploration of differentiated phi. Let me take you through this journey, step by profound step. Step 1. The licensing gate. Differentiated phi begins with a discipline, licensing. A reality that is not windowed is not public, and a science that is not windowed is not honest. The licensing gate says, a claim only exists where coherence exists. A measurement only exists where signal rises above the noise floor. A derivative only exists where the window supports it. And every estimate must declare its uncertainty, not as apology, but as identity. This is why the first episodes of Differentiated Phi are about the first public windows, the first stable ways the universe becomes readable. Not because the universe wasn't there before, but because there is not a scientific category until readability is certified. Step 2. The first public object. Then comes the first public object, the first thing that is instrument touchable. A equals d phi. This is the first differential phase of phi. Not phi as an absolute number, but the differential structure, the change structure, that remains invariant under phi shifting by a constant. A is where the private becomes public, and with A, the tri-unity readouts become possible. We name them once, clearly, because we will live inside them for a long time. Phi is the primitive. When phi becomes readable as change, three inseparable readouts arrive together. Omega, the temporal dimension, omega. Kappa, the spatial dimension, kappa. Nu, the kinematic dimension, nu. Omega is the cadence of change. Kappa is the texture of change across events. Nu is the transport readout woven from omega and kappa together. And the key point is this. These are not primitive dimensions you begin with. They are readouts that crystallize when phi becomes measurably structured. So differentiated phi is not adding time and space. It is showing how the notion of time and space arises as the public shadows of one underlying readable order. Step 3. The derivative atlas. But the tri-unity is still not enough. Because once you can read omega, kappa, and nu, you immediately face a deeper question. How do they change? How does omega change? How does kappa bend? How does nu drift? And the moment you ask those questions, you have entered the derivative language, the jet alphabet. This is where the structured derivative atlas arrives. The atlas is the universe inventorying its full local vocabulary. It is the promise that if something is real locally, then it is expressible as a finite jet functional. Not as a metaphysical thing, but as a certified observable built from a finite tower of derivatives that your windows can actually estimate. And here the firewall sharpens again. Because without the atlas rule, new observables can be invented endlessly. And that is how hallucination becomes science. So the atlas places a seal. No new observables without codex inclusion and gauge justification. Step 4, where smoothness breaks. Now comes a beautiful truth. If phi were perfectly smooth everywhere, reality would be featureless. Loops would always unwind. Nothing discrete could ever emerge. So reality must have places where smoothness breaks. We call these defects. Defects are not errors. They are birthplaces. Birthplaces of discreteness. Birthplaces of integers. Birthplaces of countable things. At a defect, phi's cyclic nature reveals itself. The phase slips, coherence drops, and from this slip, something miraculous emerges. Exact integers, not approximate numbers, not close enough, exact whole numbers. Because when you trace a complete loop around the defect, you don't get almost a full circle. You get exactly a full circle, or exactly 2 circles, or exactly n circles. This exactness is not imposed. It is forced by mathematics, forced by closure. Step 5. Holonomy and the birth of integers. From defects, we get holonomy. Holonomy means memory in loops, a universe that can track where it's been. When you trace a complete loop in reality, you get an integer result. Always. Exactly. These integers become reality's first stable tokens. the first things that persist exactly. They are not yet particles, not yet objects, but the seeds from which particles and objects will grow. Step 6. The gradient architecture. Now reality faces its first architectural decision. If everything were the same scale, nothing interesting could happen. So reality develops a gradient, a structure of scales. At one end, extreme compression. This is what we will later call the quantum realm. Dense cadence, tight spatial texture, where change happens in rapid, tiny steps. At the other end, extreme dilation. This is what we will later call the cosmic realm. Smooth cadence, sparse texture, where change unfolds slowly, grandly. And in between, a middle band, a shelf of stability, where persistence becomes possible, where memory can form, where complex patterns can endure. This gradient isn't arbitrary. It emerges from phi's nature, from how its changes change. Step 7. Energy as tally. Now we're ready for a concept you know well, but seen through completely new eyes. Energy. Not as a mysterious fluid, not as a substance, not as a thing that flows. Energy as tally, a count of activity, a summary of how omega and kappa are changing. Energy is a report card for reality's busyness, a calibrated measure of cadence and texture. This reframing changes everything. Because if energy is tally, then conservation of energy isn't a mysterious law. It's an accounting identity, a balance sheet that must balance. Step 8. Coupling grammar. Now things get really interesting. A universe of isolated tallies would be boring. Numbers changing but never interacting. So reality develops coupling grammar. How one pattern compels another. How one tower influences another. How integers combine and separate. This coupling isn't magic, it's mathematics. It's the lawful ways that phi's derivatives can relate to each other. But here's the discipline. No coupling is allowed unless it can be licensed, unless it can be measured, unless it can be falsified. Step 9. The birth of things. From persistence and coupling, something miraculous emerges. Things. Not as fundamental particles, not as irreducible objects, but as persistent certificates. A thing is a pattern that endures, a configuration that maintains its identity across time, a loop of integers that stays closed. This changes how we see everything. An electron isn't a tiny ball, it's a persistent certificate with specific integer charges. A proton isn't a bundle of stuff, it's a stable configuration of persistence patterns. Objecthood isn't primitive, it's earned. Through stability, through persistence, through license certification. Step 10. Memory and meaning. Now reality becomes truly rich, because persistence allows memory. Not just things that endure, but patterns that encode past states. Configurations that carry information about where they've been. From memory comes the first glimmers of meaning. Meaning isn't magic, it's operational. When one pattern reliably indicates another, when a configuration carries information about something beyond itself. We develop what we call semantic encoders: presence, identity, multiplicity, relation, change, persistence, causation. These aren't philosophical concepts, they're operational tools, ways that reality encodes information about itself. Step 11. Prediction and law discovery. Now something even more profound happens. A universe with memory can begin to predict. Not perfectly, not magically, but probabilistically, statistically. Patterns that have persisted in certain ways tend to persist in similar ways. Configurations that have evolved along certain paths tend to continue along those paths. This is the birth of law. Not law as divine command, not law as mathematical Platonic form, law as compressed memory, as efficient description of persistent patterns. And here we introduce our most important tool, selector inference. Not assuming what the laws are, but inferring which admissible class of patterns governs a particular regime. Always with uncertainty, always with scope limits, always with falsification conditions. Step 12. The law object and firewall. Finally, we reach the culmination of episode 13. The law object. Not just an equation, not just a theory, but a complete packaged understanding with scope, where it applies, mask, where it doesn't apply, uncertainty, how sure we are, prediction contract, what it promises, audit artifacts, how it can be checked, falsifiers, how it could be proven wrong. This is the epistemic firewall, the immune system for knowledge, a way to ensure that our understanding never runs ahead of what can be checked, a way to prevent delusion, a way to build truth that survives comparison. Why these two movements matter together. Now, let me step back and show you why episode 13 needs both movements. Because this isn't just theoretical architecture. This changes everything about how we understand reality. Undifferentiated phi gives us the permission. Differentiated phi gives us the language. Without the permission, the language has no foundation. Without the language, the permission remains silent. Think of it this way. Undifferentiated phi is the legal constitution of readability. It establishes the rules that make any claim possible. Differentiated phi is the operational constitution of public reality. It establishes how claims become certified, measured, and trusted. If we only had undifferentiated phi, we would have possibility without actuality. We would know what could be, but never what is. If we only had differentiated phi, we would have measurement without foundation. We would have science without understanding why science is possible. Together, they give us the complete picture. And here's the most important insight. This isn't just about physics. This is about what it means to know anything at all. Every measurement you've ever taken, every experiment you've ever performed, every fact you've ever trusted, all rely on this two-movement structure. First, the permission for distinction. Then, the certified reading of difference. First, the possibility of comparability. Then, the actual comparison. First, the silent ground. Then, the speaking universe. The journey ahead. Now, as we complete this overview of episode 13, let me show you what comes next. In the parts that follow, we will explore each of these steps in detail. We will start with primitive comparability. We will ask, what does it mean that things could be different? We will explore pre-ontological status. What comes before exists? We will examine why phi is not difference itself, but the capacity for difference. We will understand gauge relational essence, why only differences speak. We will learn about public carriers, how truth can be shared without cheating. We will discover cyclic value spaces, why reality wraps. We will explore bundle and section reality, why the universe might need patches. We will see why spacetime isn't the stage, but part of the performance. We will understand smoothness as consistency, why local reality is coherent enough to describe. We will confront infinite jet potential, why reality has bottomless depth. We will learn why absolutes are unobservable, why measurement is always relational. We will see that phi has no intrinsic dynamics. Why grammar comes before story. We will understand why phi is timeless and spaceless. Why containers emerge from what they contain. We will see why phi is neither mental nor physical. Why it precedes that split. We will understand why phi is not a substance or field. Why it's not made of anything. We will see why phi is the foundation of logic and information. Why thinking requires comparison. And we will do all this with one discipline always present: the firewall. The immune system that prevents us from smuggling in what we should be deriving. The complete picture. So, what is episode 13 in its complete form? It is the story of how reality becomes readable. It begins with the most minimal permission, that things could be different. It moves through the moment when that permission becomes public, when phi becomes readable as change. It builds the complete language of readability, from triunity to towers, from defects to integers, from gradient to tally, from coupling to persistence, from memory to meaning, from prediction to law. And it does all this with one unwavering discipline. Everything must survive comparison. Every claim must carry its falsifier. Every truth must be auditable. This is not just another theory. This is a complete re-understanding of what theory is. Not as description of a pre-existing world, but as the reading of a world that becomes through being read. One final truth. Before we end, let me leave you with the most important understanding of all. Phi isn't somewhere else. Phi isn't hidden behind reality. Phi is reality's readability, reality's capacity to be known. When we measure, we're reading phi. When we think, we're using phi. When we know, we're participating in phi's self-revelation. We are not separate observers looking at a distant universe. We are patterns within phi. We are phi reading itself. This changes everything about what it means to be human, about what it means to know, about what it means to exist. But that understanding, that profound realization, is what we earn through the complete journey of episode 13, through understanding both movements, through seeing how the silent ground gives permission for the speaking universe, through understanding how the speaking universe reveals the nature of the ground. This is episode 13, the complete journey, the foundation of everything that follows. Now we're ready to begin, part by part, step by step, from silence to speech, from permission to pattern, from undifferentiated phi to the rich, lawful, knowable universe. This is where we build the foundation. This is where we earn each word. This is where reality becomes readable. And it all begins with the first permission, the first distinction, the first readable change. Let's begin. Always peace be upon you.